Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this meeting of Corporate Parenting. My name is Kate Critchell. I'm the Senior Democratic Services Officer today. Can we take the first item on the agenda, which is to elect a chairman for the meeting? Do I have any nominations?
I'm very happy to nominate Kate Weller if she's happy to accept for today.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Is that seconded?
Second that, please.
Thank you, Councillor Biggs. Are there any other nominations? Great. Kate, would you like to take the chair?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, committee. Right. First thing is apologies, please. Louise, do you have those? Louise Drury.
Yes, I do, Councillor Weller. So we have apologies from Councillor Somper, Leslie Hutchinson, Stuart Dipple, Miriam Lee, Councillor Jones and Councillor Holloway.
Right, thank you very much. Next item is for you, Teresa, to just sort of kick us off, as it were.
Just a
Lovely, thank you.
point of
Sorry.
order. Do we
Sorry,
need to?
We need a vice chair, don't we, Richard? Yes, sorry. Can I nominate Councillor Biggs as vice chair? Will anyone second?
I'm happy to second.
Thank you. No other nominations? No, thank you. Thank you, Richard, and thank you for reminding me. Teresa.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, colleagues. It's great to be with you all again, even if it's online, and we look forward to when we can in future be able to meet in person and therefore with many more of our young people as part of our corporate parenting planning and arrangements. But for this afternoon, it's really good in this time of August 2021 to be able to report that our numbers of our looked after children today are standing at 437 in our family, so a little bit lighter than we've been before, and that's very welcome and very much an indication of the numbers of our children who are coming into our care continue to come in a planned way, and the numbers that exit increasingly are exiting to permanency within families their own or other new adoptive families. So we're really pleased to see that continue, particularly at the back end of a very, very challenging 17 months. And so it's all credit to our fabulous foster carers and our staff and our children themselves are continuing to work really well together and seeing those permanent arrangements coming forward. We're also looking, as we'll see in the performance framework, at increasingly improved performance levels across the board. And that means that we've got a better health options for our children, better education options and better opportunities when they become our care leavers into accommodation, education and training and employment. So everything's continuing to edge in the right direction. Where we do continue to have significant challenges, as do the rest of the country, is in our sufficiency of placements and our offer around where we can be offering our children forever homes. We are still seeing a steady engagement within becoming adopters or fosterers for our children. We're still seeing members of the public coming forward. But for the last quarter, so for May, June and July, nationally and locally, we've seen a decline in some of those fostering applications. We're not totally surprised by that. I think probably a tired country, a country that has felt somewhat under pressure. It won't be everybody that will be immediately feeling that they can open their hearts and homes to other people's vulnerable children. So we will continue with our campaigns around recruitment. We'll continue with our building programme around residential provision and provision for our care leavers. That's all presently still on schedule to have a particular opening of further provision towards the end of the year. And as I've said to you previously, we are really keen to develop that level of provision in a steady way to make sure that it's only offering good or outstanding provision for our children. So largely a very well held, stable system, but with the pressures of sufficiency, as we've talked about before. Thank you, Chair. Chair, you're on mute.
Councillor Jones, did you want to come in now with a question for Teresa?
Yes, please, if I may.
Yes.
I know we had a real problem in trying to get some, especially the teenagers, into foster care. How many do we still have unplaced at the moment? Do you know? Because I know we were in the 30s, I think, a little while ago.
We were, absolutely, and we have presently more children in residential care than we think need residential care, and they're there because we don't have that provision. So we have 68 young people in residential care. We have upwards of 70 teenagers who we would like to see moved either back into their own families or into foster family care on a permanent basis. And that's the kind of magnitude that we're still looking at, Carol. We also have a number of young 16 and 17-year-olds who continue to be in supported living arrangements, unregulated provision, none in unregistered under 16, but a number of 16 and 17-year-olds. It is increasingly challenging. What we're seeing is across the whole of the Southwest. I obviously spend a lot of time talking with directors of children's services across the region and nationally. And what we're seeing across the whole region is a gap in that provision. Central government have produced and offered some capital investment for us to build further. I have to tell you that the timescales for doing so are incredibly ambitious, optimistic even, and we are looking to try and achieve an option to that, some of that capital fund that's available nationally, but it's a very tight window. So what we're really keen to do is to really re-energise and forever kind of keep pushing on our recruitment campaign. But what we know about that is it really is kind of having those conversations at a really local level. Yeah. So it is around those young people, and we want to be talking with all of our staff, all of our partners and all of our elected members about how we get into all of the sports clubs, all of the arrangements. So as people are coming back out of their homes and back into places where we can easily interface with them, we'll be looking at an autumn of boots on the ground, really, recruiting.
Yeah, thank you.
Let's go on.
Thanks, Teresa. Next item is number 3, Independent Reviewing Officer's Annual Report. I have you, Dan, Claire, to introduce this, and I just seen we've got Jane McLennan here, so you will then present, will you, Jane? Thank you very much. Claire.
Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Weller. And just a very brief introduction. Our independent reviewing officers play a really important role in helping to advocate for our children and young people's needs. So a really important part of the system to help keep us right, to help advocate on behalf of those children, young people, to ensure that they get what they need. And a period of time where they've taken under some additional quality assurance activity as well. So these are a really important part of our workforce. They're not involved in children's operational planning, but they sit alongside, and there are eyes and ears in the system to make sure that we're getting everything right. So really, really important role. And welcome to Jane, really, for sharing with us quite a detailed report and good plans for what we need to do next.
Thank you, Claire. Yes, so the information and the data is describing a developing and quality service which continues to support good outcomes for our children and young people in care. We continue to believe that a person-centred relationship approach is more effective in improving the experiences and outcomes for our children and young people, and that this can be improved and achieved alongside robust escalations and challenge, which is a key function of our service. In the period of 1st of April 2020 to the 31st of March 21, the Quaro service completed a total of 1,397 child in care reviews. On average, there are about 114 reviews a month, which is 28 to 29 a week, with 96.28% completed within timescales. And just over 91% of children aged 4 and over participated fully in their reviews. The report also highlights the development of our escalation process and evidence that it's becoming embedded in our practice and is also having a positive impact on outcomes for our children and young people. At the 31st of March 2021, we had responsibility for 449 children and young people in care, and we've heard today how that has reduced from the end of March, which is positive to hear. 51% of those children in care had a statement of educational needs, and 34% of these children and young people had an EHCP. We're continuing to ensure that our children and young people have access to education and are supported to achieve the best they can, and regular meetings are held and monitored through the reviews and the escalation processes. Who do they live with? So on the 31st of March 2021, it was really positive that the majority of our children in care, so 79% of our children, were placed within a family. 57% were placed with foster carers and 15% placed with family and friends who were approved foster carers, and 3% placed for adoption, and 4% were placed back with their own parents as part of a reunification plan. Distance, I know that Teresa spoke about this earlier as well, that 50% of the children in care in Dorset were living in accommodation within 20 miles of their home address. This has been identified as an area of priority, and efforts are being made through our permanency tracking, our line of sight meetings and other panels to enable our children and young people, where appropriate and at the right time for them, to return back to the local area. If we look at participation, a primary objective of the service is to ensure that children are central to the decisions that are made about them and that their voice is evident and heard. The report and the data shows that there's no stability in the number of children attending their reviews, and we do have to also accept that I think COVID played a part of this, in that it was very strange times for everybody. The data shows that between 72 and 94% of children and young people aged 4 years plus had attended and participated fully in their review. So that leaves around 28% who have not engaged in the process or have chosen not to engage in the process, and we need to look further into that and to drill down and to look at ways in which we can support those children and young people to feel part of the process, so that we can hear their voice and act on that. It should be noted that those figures are comparable to our other local authorities within the region, so that's also positive in terms of we're all around the same sort of figures. The Quarros have worked in partnership with our young people, social workers, education and our health colleagues to formalise the process for person-centred reviews and to ensure that they're consistent across the service. And we will continue to support all of our children and young people to engage in their reviews, which is a key priority and needs to be central to any of our meetings. We recognise the need to improve our participation and that further work is required. And you will see from the report that that's part of one of our objectives for the next year. So if we look at the progress from the actions that were identified in the 2019-20 reports, that's last year's report, all but one action had been achieved over the last 12 months. The outstanding action was the inclusion of children from the Children in Care Council as part of the interview process for the Quarros. So I know that is on the agenda, and I think that was sort of linked again to just the practical difficulties of getting those children as part of the process. So that's definitely on the agenda for this year as well. So our overall summary is that the Quarro service continues to make steady and purposeful improvement in many of its key activities. We have embedded previous improvements and demonstrated that the service can sustain these. We continue to have a specific impact for individual children and young people and support them with their plans and issues that arise for them. That's my summary of a detailed report.
That's lovely. Thank you very much, Jane. I've got Councillor Biggs wishing to speak. Councillor Biggs.
Yes, thank you. You know, it is a very positive report. It's undoubted. I think what I suppose I'd just like to dig into a little bit is the IRO element of it. Is, you know, the key bit is independence, and just that sort of gut feeling. It feels very defensive of Dorset Council and being part of that corporate, rather than that slightly to one side. And there doesn't seem to be the remotest bit of criticism or highlighting issues that we could do more to work on. And I guess this is what we as Corporate Parenting Board should be digging at. It's great to hear that everything, you know, lots going well, but we know there are elements that could do better. And what can we do and to support the service to do that? I mean, the only one statistic I can see there which shows something that hasn't been completed, I think, is on page 21, which is that the minutes haven't been achieved in 20 working days, you know, which is sort of a technical issue, but I guess it could be quite important if we needed to review something quickly, you know, and are some of those taking 80 days or not, you know, are children not able to see their own reports, you know, when it's fresh in their minds, you know, so that would seem quite important to me. But just like some sort of comment on that, really. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Did you want to come back, Jane, or Claire, whichever?
I'm happy to respond if
Please.
yes. Yes, it is an area of improvement that we need to make. There's been an impact on the recommendation, not the recommendations, the minutes. So that's a letter that's written to the child or the young person following the review, primarily because of an increased sickness levels due to COVID and some of the team having long COVID symptoms. So that's not an excuse, it's a fact. Recommendations are completed within the 5 days, and those do get sent out to the children. So the decisions that are made, the children get those, and it's the bulk of the information. I am working tirelessly with the QOROs to make sure that they, the ones that are significantly out of date are now updated, and they've had protected caseloads and protected time in order to do that. And the situation as we sit here today in August is very different to what it was in March. So it's very much a focus and something that I am working tirelessly with the team to do, and I would hope that when I'm sat here next year that we see a significant improvement in that performance indicator.
Thank you.
Thank you. Richard and Teresa, I can see you want to come in anyway. Would it be possible, and Richard, do you think it would be helpful if we have just a sort of a very, very short update on that towards the end of the year, just to see the direction of travel that we're going in? That might help. Teresa, do come in here.
Yeah, thank you. Just really helpful challenge, I think, Richard. And I just wanted to kind of assure you, and not necessarily reassure you, but assure you that one of the things that we've been having a conversation with Jane and her team about is around wanting to see, and we are seeing, an increase in the level of escalations that the independent reviewing officers make around the work about our children. We see that level of escalation being an important positive. So sometimes you can read them having gone up and you can quite rightly assume that something's going wrong. But actually, we think escalations and making sure that those are happening is a sign of that independence. We know that the eye of the IRO piece has always been a bit of a challenge, because we struggle with making sure that they've got their professional leadership from a social work position alongside where do they sit in the organisation. But from my point of view, one of the things that we've been monitoring as a senior leadership team is that those escalations are A, going up in number, B, getting resolved as quickly as possible, and C, any of the themes from those escalations, what are we learning about it, is really wrapped around back into our practice. So Jane, I don't know if you want to say a little bit more about escalations, because it is the bit that we've been really pushing on, I think, in the last few months, isn't it, in particular?
Yes, and it's having to change and embed culture and focus, not just within the QOROs, but with social workers and with team managers. And it's sort of the senior leaders are behind there, but there's some more work to do with our colleagues. And it is about seeing it as a positive, in saying that we know that where there are things that we need to improve and we need to get better, and it's not we need to get better so that our outcomes for our children and young people are better, because that is all of our ultimate goal. We all share that goal. So it's about how we do it and how we can support each other for doing it. So rather than being lots of emails and lots of talking, actually what we're finding is now we're starting to really embed the escalation process, is that's starting to bring about quicker change, and that the tide is starting to turn, which is positive to see, and it's something that will continue the momentum. And there's some training and there's some work to do out there within the childcare teams as well. And there are pressures. There are pressures across all of the service, and it's about this being a way in which we can highlight where those pressures and those challenges are, so that we can get support to look at how we need to change and what we need to do to shift things.
Thank you. I've just got just a tiny question. You said early on in your report that the percentages of young people who are still not taking part in their interviews and reviews, and there will always be some, I am sure, who simply are impossible to engage with. I just wonder when, I mean, I know you're talking to other authorities all the time. So if we can pick up on any ideas, any innovation that they have that we can replicate, so that we can get, you know, embed the habit when they're really quite young. Hopefully they won't stay with us for years and years and years, but those that sadly do, it is embedded in them that they are part of this. They are an integral part of the plans and the decisions that we're making for them, and we want to hear what they've got to say. So if any other authority has ideas of engaging, then we need to look at those as well.
I'm talking to Cornwall, and I've been talking to Cornwall as well, to my counterpart in Cornwall, who in terms of going back to Councillor Biggs's comment about the timeliness of minutes of child and care reviews being completed. So I'm getting their ideas and following some advice and ideas in which they've made their improvements. And what they have said is that it takes time to embed and to see that change. It's been a couple of years, is what they've said, to sort of get to where they are now. So yes, it's a very, very good point. And I meet quarterly with the regional independent reviewing officers as well, and managers. So that's another area that I can use and utilise the experience and knowledge from my colleagues.
Thank you. Thank you. I've got a question from Elaine and then from Councillor Lugg. Elaine?
Thank you, Chair. Jane, you have in your report under section 5 around the quantitative information, a large figure, 51% of children in care who have special educational needs. I guess as part of the, following up from what Councillor Weller just talked about there, that's going to make it quite difficult for those young people to be involved in their conversations. So I suppose I'm asking a question about how confident we can be that those young people are supported in the best way possible to be engaged in their reviews. And the second part of my observation there was around, you've quoted SEN, but not disability. So we have a lot of children who have got special educational needs, but it doesn't, you don't, and you in your figures pick up anything around disability. So it would be interesting to know which one of those children have a disability. So it's not just the SEN need, but there's a disability need there as well.
Yes, absolutely. I will include that in any update reports and going forward. We do try very hard in terms of engaging all of our children and young people, those that are verbal and non-verbal and have additional needs. We have the advocacy service, and we have skilled practitioners in terms of being able to look at ways and alternative and creative ways of getting children's views and wishes and feelings. It's not always around sitting there and having that face-to-face conversation. One of the things you'll see from the priorities is around our feedback from children and young people. And again, it will be important to include all of our children and young people, those with a disability, with additional needs, younger and older. And we can do that as well through inclusion of the Child in Care Council and feedback after our Child in Care reviews, designed to meet the different and varying needs of all of our children in care.
Okay, thank you, Jane.
Thank you. That answers that for you, Elaine?
It does, but it would be good to see that figure of disabled children as well,
yes.
I think.
Yes, certainly. Councillor Lugg, Kathy?
I think it's a very positive report, and I'm pleased to see the number of indirect ways you've engaged with children, because I think the process can be quite confrontational for some children. And there's always going to be a section, especially of teenagers, who just want to forget that they're in care and don't want to engage at all with the process. So I think we're never going to get 100% of all children telling us what they think. Just a comment rather than a question.
No, but it's very valid, I think. Have we got any other questions for Jane before we move on? Teresa?
Thank you, Chair. Elaine, it's a really good point, and we absolutely need to highlight and focus on that. What I was just struck by was thinking around, for some of our disabled children with disabilities, we have lots of ways of hearing their voices. And for example, if I look at the regulation visits into the Cherries, the officers who do those visits are exceptionally good actually at getting the children's voices into those Reg 44 visits, and they're really rich, detailed feedback. And so we can be really confident about that. And that's an example of one of our own provisions, really being able to really connect to that on a monthly basis, not on just a kind of 6 monthly basis, and getting those children's voices. And we look at that as the senior leadership team every month. The challenge for us is to make sure that we're getting that exactly the same for our external provision. And I'm not sure that we are. So I really think that's a helpful challenge, Jane. And I think it's helpful for us to think about how we bring focus to that in the coming months. Take the model that we've got from the Cherries Reg 44 and the Cherries IRO independent reviews, and making sure that we're getting the same quality across external provision, because we know that's where our children are likely to be at greater risk. So thanks, Elaine.
That's excellent, Teresa. Thank you. If we've got no more questions, we'll move on to the next item, which is item 4, annual LADO report. Claire, you're introducing. I'm not sure who's presenting.
We've got Laura here with us.
Right, thank you. Thank you.
Laura is Jane's colleague and counterpart, another one of our quality assurance managers. So Laura will present this report. And the LADO report is a really important service. It's a small service within Children's Services, which helps us understand and manage any allegations that are made by professionals and other people that are working with children. So a really, really important role and function that sits within Children's Services to help us understand if children are safe and that the professionals that are working with them are appropriate. I'll hand over to Laura, who can tell us a little bit more about the service and where we're at in the work plan. So thanks, Laura.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi. So the designated officer report will identify the role of the designated officer as being able to, or being there to protect our most vulnerable members of society from adults in a position of trust. So my report includes a helpful flow chart which identifies the process from initial allegation through to final outcome. As we move through the report, we move to pages kind of 6 and 7 really, which holds the basis of our data. So what we can see from our inquiries and referrals during 2020 to 2021 is that our referrals have broadly been in line with previous years, despite there being an initial flurry in kind of April, May, June of the year. As we've kind of moved through the year, there has been a steady outcome really, and so we are on par with our previous years. In terms of our inquiries referring through or ending up as a referral, when we talk about inquiries, we're talking about people picking up the phone, ringing, asking for advice, and kind of running general allegations or potential allegations past our designated officer, and then deciding whether actually there's evidence that a child's been placed at risk, which will result in a referral. So our inquiries are broadly relating to 50, really. We get an inquiry and 50% of those inquiries end up as a referral. So what we can see in the report is our source of referrals primarily is and has been for many years from our education colleagues. So 29% of our allegations were made from education, with the second largest referrers being in residential provision and being about foster carers. So we do have referrals from the police, from health, from early years, but actually our main three referral sources are education, residential and foster carers. So when we move to look at the referral types, what we have as a primary referral type is around physical kind of physical chastisement, physical children making allegations that they've been pushed or shoved or grabbed, and it also includes children who are restrained. So that is our main reason for referral, alongside staffing. Now, when we say staffing, that can include things like kind of examples of staffing not ensuring that their car insurance is kept up to date, not ensuring that their DBS is kept up to date, and not kind of following staff processes that are defined within establishments. Really, things like well, I've given some examples really, but I think that staffing can cover other areas, but primarily it's concerns about a person's professionalism within their current role. So when we move to look at our outcomes of allegations, what we found this year is that there has been a change. In 2020, we had about 80 of our allegations being substantiated. Compared to this year, which is kind of almost opposite, really, in that about 80 are actually unfounded, which means that there hasn't been the evidence available to demonstrate that a referral is substantiated or not. Now, we do think that some of this is around kind of not being able to have the same level of access during the periods that people have been homeschooling, not being able to have the same evidence available to us to be clear that an allegation is substantiated. And actually, with our allegations over the past year, a lot of that has been around kind of staffing, professional boundaries, kind of issues with computers, kind of messages being sent outside of school time, or messages sent in a way that's not considered to be of a professional nature, which has kind of led to our staffing referrals, really. But some of those have been difficult to evidence in a kind of field where we're not having direct face-to-face contact with children. So we are expecting that some of those outcomes will change this year, as we're now moving back to a face-to-face teaching position primarily. During the course of 2020 to 2021, we did have an internal audit. We had an independent auditor came in to look at the processes in place for the designated officer, and identify whether our referrals were being recorded in a timely manner, the quality of those referrals, and the quality of the outcomes. So we had an action plan that was put in place by Vashti that undertook that review, and actually we're using that internal review to develop the service in a way that ensures that we're always ensuring that always recording things in a very timely way, and always making sure that our colleagues are clear about the reasons that decisions are made. So there has been, from that update, each area has been developed. We now have a clear system on what we call TRIEX for our foster carers when allegations are made, so that actually people are able to clearly follow the process and understand what's happening and why. We have kind of a threshold matrix that's been shared with our colleagues, and makes the language clear in terms of our terminology around whether something's substantiated, whether it's unsubstantiated, whether it's unfounded. Because what we did find was that actually there could be some confusion about the reasons for those decisions. So there are some things that we were able to achieve in quite a timely way, and that kind of has formed the basis of our work moving forwards during 2020-21. We do have key performance indicators that we continuously review and update. I update to our to our performance boards. The key performance indicators include the speed at which a decision is made following a referral, and then a subsequent what we call initial evaluation meeting is held. So there are timescales around that, and a post-allegation investigation meeting. So they should always be held within 28 days of our initial meeting. And so there's certainly been improvements in those areas, and that's the performance indicators we're using to continue to review against on a monthly basis at the moment. We're also trying to improve the rate at which we're starting an allegation process and then closing it. So that's been kind of an area that has really been helpful to us. One of the other things that we've kind of moved to develop on is the way that we record our allegations on our database, what we call Mosaic, has not always been it's not always been easy to follow and to understand the numbers. We have two separate databases that runs. We have our information that goes on Mosaic when we meet threshold for a referral, and we also have information that we record when there's concerns about an individual, but actually we aren't necessarily progressing to a referral because the evidence isn't available, and actually we have information that we will share with our partner agencies, and we certainly work with BCP in very closely with colleagues that work across the border. And so what we've developed, or what we're developing within Mosaic, is a way of recording all of that information so that we don't have to run two separate databases, really. So there are certainly changes afoot within the process. What has also happened, which I haven't referenced in the report during the last 3 months, is that we had a local authority designated officer, Patrick Crawford, that's been in post for the last kind of 7 to 10 years, really. He has retired. So we are now in a position where we have an interim designated officer, Jonathan Edwards, who is experienced. He's worked for many years in Torbay and has moved to us to support in our cover whilst we are advertising for a permanent designated officer. And so there has been some changes in the last couple of months that will really allow us to look at things around things like our timeliness and our recording. Will be in a much better position to immediately pick up the data rather than having to go through a separate database and count on a kind of 1, 2, 3, 4 basis, because that is what we are doing with some kind what we call contacts or inquiries. So there's certainly been some changes that will take us forward. And I think that, come the beginning of 2022, we'll be in a very strong position to be clearly able to demonstrate our data very quickly, and it will be embedded within the process. I think we are kind of in a changing time, really, where we have a plan that we're working towards with our current colleagues, and something that will take us forward to ensure that the process is very slick come 2022. I think that's probably everything for now. Sorry, thank you.
Councillor Weller, I wonder if you might be muted.
Yes, I've got a builder's lorry outside and I didn't want you all to be hearing that, so I switched myself off. I've got, thank you for that, Claire. Vic, you wanted to come in.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Yes, I was just going to add, so we're working closely with our colleagues in police and the Safer Schools and Communities team, which is a partnership with the youth offending team and also with the council. And our partnership working there is to develop a Safer Schools training programme and toolkit with our schools. So our police colleagues are aiming to roll that out over the next academic year, and we're doing that together with them to give some leadership around access to our schools and school leaders. And we're also going to be looking over the next academic year to create a working group of about 10 to 15 schools representing a range of different phases of schools to help us develop that toolkit and training together. So that will be coming out in the next academic year, but I just thought I'd add that to Laura's update.
Thank you. Thank you. Claire.
Thanks. And just to follow on from Vic, a really important thing for us to be aware of and that might play into the next year or so is increase in reporting around historical peer-on-peer abuse or sexual abuse. And some of you may well have heard of the Everyone's Invited website, where they're calling forward and asking for testimonies from children and young people about their experiences of being in schools. So the work that Vic's doing along with our colleagues will be a really important piece of work for us to be able to respond and shape that. But it is likely that over the coming year, we're already seeing an increase in demand at the front door, and in some particular geographical areas where there has been experiences for our children and young people. So it'll be one that we'll keep an eye on from the designated officer space, but also one for us to be all aware of and mindful about making sure that we're responding effectively to those needs in the community.
Thanks very much, Claire. Richard, Councillor Biggs.
Yeah, so just a few points. I suppose we're interested in, particularly as a corporate parenting board, in numbers for looked after children, and I'm not sure that that's totally apparent within that breakdown. The other thing is benchmarking against other authorities. There's no evidence, you know, are we doing, is that typical, or are we, you know, low or high? That would be useful. And the other thing I couldn't see in there was, what's the child's perspective of the going through the process? You know, could that be improved? You know, is it a really torturous, unpleasant process that takes months and months and very bureaucratic, or is it something that, you know, is reasonable? And I think that's what I want to know from the report, that rather than just the, you know, the statistics, which are useful, is getting that human perspective out, I think, for me.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I think in terms of looked after children, no, that isn't immediately available within the report. I can certainly include that. I mean, I note that Jane's going to provide an update towards the end of the year, and I'm certainly willing to kind of do that as well, because as we develop our mosaic system, as I was saying, we are in a position where we'll be able to immediately take off how many allegations were against foster carers, how many of those allegations were made by looked after children, and kind of what the outcomes were, really. So I'm certainly able to do that. Benchmarking against local authorities, yes, we are in line with our statistical neighbours. We do have a quarterly meeting with our Southwest partners, and we do work very closely with BCP. We are kind of regularly in and out of communication. We're certainly, in terms of our statistics and the number of children within our area, we certainly are working on an even level, really. So I can certainly provide that information if that's going to be helpful. I think that's it. Yes, it is a good point in terms of the human element of the impact, really. And certainly what happens when there is an allegation made against an adult is that the child would have made the allegation to their social worker or to another trusted adult around them when the allegation is coming directly from the child. And so when our social workers are working with children, they will be doing kind of gathering information in a very sensitive way. The designated officer doesn't have any direct contact with the child, so the child is supported to make any allegation or kind of give any information to the police, for example, or to attend kind of medicals by their social worker. And it is something that I can certainly ensure that we include in future reports if the board would think it's helpful to have the experiences of children as a you know, an ongoing response, really. I think that would be really helpful, because you're right, it does bring the human element back to it.
Thank you. Is that okay with you, Richard? That sounds good.
Yeah, I think that's really useful. I mean, I suppose the only other thing is we always focus on our immediate neighbours, but it'd be interesting to see, well, is it radically different in Scotland? You know, I'd be interested, you know, because it could be, oh, you know, the half the numbers or the twice the numbers, you know, and that would be quite interesting. I know I know it's more complication, isn't it? But we always focus on our very immediate neighbours, but, you know, how are they doing up north and Scotland and Wales, you know? Just to throw a few other things, just to see where we are in the overall, you know.
Yeah, certainly. Teresa, did you want to come in there?
If I might, thank you, Chair, and Richard, thank you so much. That really helpful, you know, probing questions, which really are very, very welcome. I think referring you to page 46, I think it is, it shows there's 29 and 26 of the allegations, 29 against residential care providers and 26 around foster carers. So it gives some sort of quantum of the numbers, but not enough about the individual experience at all. And I think that's really helpful feedback. I think the other thing I just wanted to point out on that wheel, and there's a really small percentage there from sports clubs and social clubs. We know that's a really high risk area. So actually we want to be seeing more referrals. Clearly we don't, but you know, we're for us to be assured that we're getting the referrals into the designated officer from the right places, that percentage really should be larger, shouldn't it, Laura? I think we kind of understand that's an area of concern for us. So just giving a little bit more context around there. Our sense check, and absolutely we should be sense checking against good and outstanding authorities and those that are, you know, really getting this right. But of course, this is an area where sometimes when you're really getting it right, your numbers are higher. Because you're absolutely, you know, getting the right kind of communications in. So that's just really, I wanted us to kind of just be alert and alive to that and keep a track on those sporting organisations as we go forward, because we know what that's coming through in terms of young people telling us about their experiences.
I think that's a really good point, Teresa, and it is something that has become very high profile recently, so we do need to keep a very close eye on it. I've got Councillor Ladd. Cathy?
I'd have liked more detail about foster carers and the time scales, because what I'm seeing in panel is that these issues are taking an incredibly long time to get resolved as far as the foster carers and the children are concerned. But it's not apparent to me at fostering panel where the delay is. So the procedure might have been completed very quickly, but for whatever reason that doesn't get to panel for a long time. So I can think of it one particular case where the allegation was made at Christmas 2019, but it didn't come to panel until February of this year, and it was quite a serious allegation, so obviously we didn't place any child during that time. But that foster carer was then allowed to continue fostering, but had had no income for 14 months, and we'd missed out on placing children. On the other hand, if we'd have decided not to continue with her registration, we could have let her go and she could have gone on to something else. So it would be helpful to say, have a bit of a breakdown, doesn't need to name anybody, but just saying the allegation was made this date, the pain was this date, it then went on to this person at this date, just so that we have an oversight of the process. Is that possible?
Just before I can see I've got Sarah Jane wanting to speak, but just before we answer that question, can I just sort of add a little extra to it sort of falls between what Richard was saying and what Cathy has just said. What we need to remember when we're thinking of how traumatic the allegations and complaints are for young people to make, it can equally be traumatic for the person against whom the complaint is being made. And as counsellors, we know that when a complaint is made against us, and it in almost every case, I believe, it is unfounded, it is still very distressing to think that somebody is complaining against you. So we need to make sure that we have not only the hand holding for our young people when they complain, but the hand holding particularly for our foster carers, but for all of those people. I mean, I say particularly for our foster carers because they are so very, very important to us. So we need to be looking at both sides of the coin almost on that, because of course until a complaint is resolved, we don't know what the situation is, so we do need to be supportive in that way. And that was really just a comment there that we need to think of both sides of the coin. Sarah Jane.
Thank you, Councillor Weller, and I think you've pretty much said what I was wanting to say, really. You've summed that up so nicely. It is very challenging, and I think for families where allegations are made, you're absolutely right. We have to do our work. We have to make sure that we are going through due process, just as Laura has described. And I think the changes that we're making in Mosaic will help us to keep an eye on those timeframes. I think Councillor Lugg, you're right to suggest that those timeframes can be quite long, and sometimes they're quite long for a reason. What we need to be able to do is exception report to say, actually, if timeframes are very long and there isn't a reason for that, to be able to make sure that we've got oversight of that and that we're making that challenge. And I think when it is our foster carers, and we've started these conversations previously for fostering panel, making sure that as much as we can, we share information as to how that investigation has progressed, and if there has been any delay, reference as to why. So the processes that Laura is talking about, the Mosaic processes, the tightening up of our oversight will help us within all of our places and spaces as a local authority, but also making sure that we're keeping that very tight for when concerns are raised for people who are caring for our children. I hope that helps. But we can include that in our reporting as well.
Thank you. That's good. Teresa, yes?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, colleagues. So I think that what we know is that these investigations are often somewhat meandering and can include police colleagues too, and we're very often not in our own timeframes with some of these matters. So we do, exactly as Councillor Lugg has suggested, want to move things along, firstly to support the people who are making the allegations in hand with those who are receiving them, but also to free up placement where we need to. But we've got to really be confident we've got all of that information in, and sometimes that can take some time. Equally, what we know about children's stories is that sometimes they need a different time frame in which to tell them. So one of the things that we see quite frequently when there's allegations against foster carers is the children only make the allegations when they've left that placement. And it's in another placement often, and they're not willing to do a joint police investigation. I think if our police colleagues were able to attend today, they'd say that's what they're very familiar with. They're often only willing to take their time, quite understandably, with their new foster care or their new placement, and to go through that account gently and slowly. This isn't something that happens, despite the best TV programmes that you see, in a kind of hour interview, very slick, very tidy. It's often messy, it's often difficult. And we absolutely want to hold on to that complexity, but it does sometimes take longer than any of us would want it to. But it should never be an administrative delay, clearly. Delay timely for the child, nobody else.
Thank you. That's very good. Can I welcome Councillor Somper, who's just managed to join us. Thanks for that, Jane. On that subject, Teresa, there was an interesting article on the radio this morning of a mother who'd made a rape allegation something like 20 years after the rape had occurred, and she'd been 13 years old at the time, and she in fact hadn't made the allegation. It was her daughter who was the result of that rape had made the allegation. So these things can be very, very historical sometimes, can't they? It's interesting to know. Councillor Jones.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
Oh, somebody knocked on the door. What a nightmare. This might sound like a really stupid question because I'm really quite new to this board. I see this service has had an internal audit. Does it ever get an external audit at all? Sorry if that sounds really stupid.
Yes, when we say internal audit, Vashti is not actually employed by Dorset Council, so she did come in as an independent auditor, and then she undertook when we say internal audit, that's because she was working through the data available to her from an internal perspective. She wasn't interviewing kind of external colleagues, but the only external audits that we would generally have would be Ofsted, and they will be obviously very interested in the kind of the findings of the Lado post.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you for that. I haven't got any other questions there, so we can move on.
Sorry, Kate, can I just come back on to reassure corporate parenting? It's Councillor Lugg,
yes.
that foster parents do get support from Foster Talk during the allegation proceedings if they want
Good,
that
good.
support. So they are supported through it.
Thank you for that, Kathy. Private fostering annual report, Sarah Jane.
Thank you, Councillor Weller. Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you would have had a chance to read Paula's report. So I'm presenting this on behalf of Paula Goldin, who is our head of locality for Dorchester and West, and she takes a lead for us around private fostering with Amy Bartram, who's her service manager. So you've had the report and you can see that currently in Dorset we have 4 young people who we are monitoring the arrangements for them for their private fostering. And it's really important to say that because I know we're the Corporate Parenting Board, but these are not young people who are children in care or children in our care. These are children whose parents have made arrangements for them. And as a local authority, our responsibility and our duty is to monitor those arrangements to ensure that they're right and proper for children. And as part of that, our responsibilities are to make sure within 7 days of a notification that a child is being privately fostered, one of our social workers will visit and we'll start to do an assessment. And that assessment isn't like an assessment for a foster carer. It's to see who's in the household, undertake police checks, health checks, and just general checks on the family. If they have children of their own, might speak to the children's schools, and to spend time with the family to understand what their motivation is to look after the child, and then to go back and make sure there are visits which take place. So within the first year, we're to do 6 weekly visits. And then after that, if the arrangements carry on, it's 12 weekly visits. And as you can see in the report, some examples of how children are privately fostered. So as I say, again, it's parental arrangements. So these might be children who've come to live in our country because they are attending an education provision here, or they're getting healthcare here. And not to be confused with children who are coming into our country and going to boarding schools, because of course boarding schools have their own arrangements. These are children who are living within families, maybe families who have separated, or maybe a family where, and there's an example in the report, a child has gone to live with a second cousin with mum's agreement, and actually that's a family arrangement. There are no safeguarding concerns, and that arrangement is working really well for everybody, including the child. So children also, and many of us would have had children who've gone on exchanges, overseas exchanges, as part of Erasmus springs into my head, so part of an arrangement through school. Most of our children don't go for over 28 days, but if they were to go over 28 days, then it would be a private fostering arrangement. So within Dorset, our arrangements are very much joined with BCP. So we do have language schools, and BCP will take the lead for any children who are coming into language schools in our area to undertake the private fostering assessment. So our 4 children are children who are not privately fostered through that arrangement. And as you can see just at the back of our report, we would expect to see more than 4 children to be privately fostered in our area. Part of our duties and monitoring responsibilities, and through our safeguarding partnership also help us hugely with this, and our colleagues in education, is to do awareness raising about private fostering. And it is a bit of a minefield for people to think about, because as soon as you hear the word fostering, people make assumptions that these are children in the care of the local authority, and of course it's quite different. So by doing awareness raising in schools, GP surgeries, youth centres, places where children and families go, just to really prompt people to think about, is this the arrangement that I've made in my family, or do I know someone who has these kinds of arrangements? We're pushing out through our schools and through the Safeguarding Partnership that awareness raising, and there's a leaflet which has been shared as part of this. Also, just to help people think, GPs are very good at referring into us, and schools, they would be our main referrers. And our action plan is really to make sure that communication's going out, keep in the conversation with partners, providers, and for our front door, our CHAD, to be really clear when they're receiving information about children, to understand if this is a private fostering pathway, to get our social workers into that space, and for ourselves to really upskill our social workers to feel confident in undertaking that assessment and the timeframes which are involved. So you can see that's very much part of our action plan. Thank you, Councillor Weller.
Thank you very much. I found this report really interesting, and my immediate reaction was, how would you know? How would you know that you had to phone someone up and say, this is what I'm doing? I looked after twin boys every weekend, so that they didn't have to spend the weekends in their boarding school, and I did that for something like 3 years. Now I'm sure that this law wasn't in place back in the dark ages, so I wasn't breaking any law, but nobody was checking me anyway. I could have been, well, I disciplined them the same way as my own sons. They were the same age, so they all were in it together. But how would you know? And I think that you've sort of explained that, but it is a bit of a minefield, isn't it, for us to make sure that we do know. So raising that awareness for everyone in every community, because we will all be aware of situations that we are unexplained, so that we can follow that through. Does anybody have any questions for Sarah Jane?
Councillor Weller, if I could say, the fact sheet which has been circulated has also gone out to all our schools and partner agencies. And if anybody would like to receive that or share it wider, please do, because it is really word of mouth, which helps us.
I think that would be really useful, and it might be something that would be useful. I wonder for all members to put that onto their agendas. Teresa, I don't know how you feel about that. It's just that members, we wouldn't know this at all, would we?
No, and just if I might, Chair, and it's not to kind of overly create anxiety, but it's important to remember that this particular legislation came from the fact that Victoria Climbié was a privately fostered child. So, you know, the risk to children being in places where they don't have oversight, where they don't have people who are genuinely looking out for their best interests is really high. And we know that over the years there have been many children in poor outcomes that have been within these sorts of arrangements. So it is really important for us to have that oversight.
Yes, that's good. Thanks, Teresa. And thanks, Louise Smith, for that note in the panel there. It's good that GP practices have had it, but a wider publication would not come amiss, would it? And that would be helpful. Kathy, you wanted to speak?
Yeah, I just wondered if we have any idea how much this is underreported. Because, you know, 4 children doesn't seem an awful lot.
No.
It would always be a guessing game, Councillor Lugg, I have to say. It's one of those things. We know 4 isn't right. We absolutely want to see and understand more. We from time to time understand that there may be a range of family arrangements. This is the kind of the quagmire world that we get into. There's lots of family arrangements that go on perfectly right, and the state have nothing to do or need to do with them. I think, you know, Kate's example, it's a very generous one around lots of us help out people at times and do that in a very kind of community way. That's right and proper, and we don't want to get in the midst of all of that. That's how communities bring up a child, isn't it? But this is a very particular thing around being for a length of time and exchange of payments and things. So it is difficult. It is messy. We do need everybody to be alert to it, to think, who are these children's people? Because we all know that, you know, gone are the days when you stand at a playground gate and say, or go to mum or dad. That's not what happens. All good school teachers now are saying, go to your person, go to your people, go to whoever's picking you up, because it's a whole raft of people that look after children and bring them up, and it's all much more complex. So it's not straightforward. It's not easy to see and determine, but it is around just raising that awareness across the broader professional grouping. It has been something that has gone down across the country. This was an area that previously was a particular Ofsted inspection focus for all the reasons that I just outlined. It isn't now a particular piece, but it's one that we keep a really tight focus on.
Thank you. I expect that schools have to be key to this, because they will know who the designated person for that child is, and if you know, if that is not a parent, then they should be questioning why that child is with them if they're not a looked after child.
Schools and doctors, yeah. And of course,
Yeah.
as I've said, sometimes it will be a casual arrangement, and that will happen. Sometimes it'll be a private law arrangement, and they won't necessarily ever get to see that. But it is about exactly that. Schools tend to know who's got parental responsibility, and that's obviously the issue here for so many of these children too. That if they end up needing interventions, and Louise could say more about that, it's around who can sign for parental responsibility can become a real issue.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's very interesting report, Sarah Jane. Thank you. Right, I hate to say how well we're doing without Matt keeping us on the straight and narrow, but please don't repeat that to him.
Of course not.
Final number 6, final Ofsted report on Hazelwood. Louise, you're doing that, are you?
Yes. Thank you, Councillor Weller. I'll introduce the report, and then my colleague Paula Bates, who is the responsible individual, will take you through the more detailed. So 19th to 20th of May, we had an inspection of Hazelwood. And this is a presentation of the report, and we really welcome this report, which highlights that our staff care very much for the young person that they're caring for, and you know, we're by offering that encouragement, nurturing aspirations, and listening to her voice. We are grateful as well that the report helped identify some important but small matters that have now been resolved. The completed action plan has been shared with Ofsted to confirm that all actions have been completed. And the report concludes that our newly appointed manager really shows enthusiasm and determination to deliver that sustained progress and continue to develop the service in the best interests of the young person. And so we are really confident that we are on the road to deliver good and outstanding provision. I'll hand over to my colleague Paula.
Hello, good afternoon. Yeah, not a lot to add really in terms of some of the detail around the shortfalls of the service. There was some training matters that had become out of date, and that's partly due to 3 members of staff left very quickly, which meant that the ratios become skewed quite quickly, and in a small staff team, that's a risk, and that's identified within the report, as is the issues with gaining training through COVID. Some of the other issues were around the speediness with which we'd responded. For example, getting a video doorbell installed and working as a safeguarding measure was seen as a shortfall. I do see that that our response has been really robust. We've used managers from the Cherries who have a good rating and a good solid, robust background, and they've come in and helped us to get things back on the straight and narrow. We had already identified the shortfalls within the service with our internal our internal auditing system, but unfortunately that wasn't quite quick enough. It resulted in the manager resigning, and that it will inevitably trigger an inspection, and unfortunately that was before we were able to address the identified issues. But as Louise says, we're confident that we're back on the right road. We have our internal monitoring systems and auditing systems supported by the Reg 44, and we are due to have the fit person registration done in August for the interim manager, Victoria Marner. So that's where we are. Any questions? I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you very much, Paula. There was a question about CCTV. Do we now have CCTV in place, or is that not up and running yet?
We have CCTV on order.
Right. Okay.
So there were a number of measures that we agreed, additional security lighting, CCTV, and the Ring doorbell sort of belts and braces approach. And the Ring doorbell was thought to be the most domestic response without trying to institutionalize it, but it does have its shortfalls. So when we post inspection, we decided to order the CCTV again. Sorry, in addition, but that's one of the things that's the supply of which is fall foul of the COVID supply chain.
Understand that, and it did concern me that this is a sort of a private home in effect. You know, we want it to be like home. And we don't put up CCTV to monitor our own teenage children, do we? So there has to be a balance there somewhere, doesn't there? I've got Councillor Parry wants to speak, and then I've got Councillor Biggs, and then Teresa. Are you happy to wait for those, Teresa, or did you want to come? Okay, right. Councillor Parry, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. I really wanted to say that, you know, we've re-entered the place of running our own care homes, okay, and that was always going to be quite a big bold decision for us to make, and Hayswood is a very good example of that early adjustments we are going to have to make to deliver that good outstanding service, and that's what we're seeing here. So I'm acutely aware that the staff there, and I have visited Hayswood, do work incredibly hard to try and keep the young person safe, and it's very challenging. It's a very different type of environment to, say, the Cherries, which we're familiar with and comfortable with, and know what we need to do to deliver a good service, outstanding service there. So it would be easy to look at this report and to be a bit hard on it, but actually I think we can look at it and be very encouraged by it and say, look, there are a few things we need to adjust, and we've indicated how those are going to happen. And we should be very hopeful that actually that done, we will see another children's home in our portfolio, you know, officially recognised as being good to outstanding, and then we can move on to do that, replicate that in our new provision that we're going to see in Dorchester Road and other places. So, you know, there's a lot to be good of it. And I'd say to Paula and others, don't be disheartened by this report. There's actually an awful lot of good in there, and it recognises terrific input from the staff. They care, and that's what we want to be reading.
Thank you very much, Councillor.
Thank you, Andrew. That's very good. Richard?
Yeah, I think Councillor Parry's right, but obviously when we bring services in-house, you know, we carry the risk. We haven't transferred that risk, although ultimately we carry that risk. And we're going to see warts and all, and we're going to see these things from time to time. But that doesn't mean to say we can be complacent. And I suppose my slight concern is that we should, you know, one of the key things is to get the statement of purpose presented to the Corporate Parenting Board, so we can look at things and see whether there's a need for CCTV and whether that's part of the EVOS and that sort of thing, and get agreement from that. But the other thing that really concerned me was that there didn't seem to be any involvement with the local members. There's 2 ward members there. Had something gone wrong in that home, the first thing they would know is that a member of the press would pick up the phone and say, what do you think about so-and-so going missing and, you know, getting involved in some awful incident or something. So, you know, we need to make sure that they're involved. You know, were they invited to this meeting? You know, we're discussing it. You know, it's in the public domain. These things often appear in the press, you know, particularly if it's not a good, you know, a really bad report or something like that. And I think that's something we need to be really mindful of. I think the CCTV is really difficult, isn't it? I mean, I don't like it. I think it institutionalises it. You know, Ofsted obviously put that in, and how can we do it so it looks discreet, not like a big camera, but one of the small ones. But then you've got all the issues of managing a CCTV system, you know, and safeguards for the children, so they're not being spied on and the rest of it, and feel that they're being spied on unnecessarily. So that's difficult, really. But yeah, I think there's lessons to be learned, and hopefully, you know, that won't occur again in the future. But no, I think it's in hand as far as the, you know, what needs to be done, isn't it? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thanks, Richard. Teresa?
Yeah, thank you. And couldn't agree more with so many of those messages that have been given. And I think the staff do know that the most important elements that have been recognised here as positive are the ones that have been often the hardest to deliver, that loving care. And that's really, really welcome, and we do welcome that. But we have been paying absolutely conspicuous care to the detail. Please be assured that all members of the team, that Paula leads and Louise and Sarah Jane and myself, debating heavily around how do we provide really good support for our young people, sometimes 17-and-a-half-year-olds. Where do we draw the line on involvement, inclusion, giving them authority over their own space and place, and where do we draw the line on being fundamentally the provider of care and therefore inspected in that? So it's a different kind of conversation that we have sometimes around with our 17-year-olds who are our corporate children about, we will be in your bedroom, we will be looking at your things, we will be in that space, than we might have with our own. That isn't for us to really struggle too much with, because it's just as it has to be. So we understand that, but it can be a really complicated conversation with our young people around, equally, in a very, very short period of time, we're going to be saying to them, okay, you're living on your own now. You're going to take complete responsibility for all those things. So it can feel like a very challenging space to be able to say to young people, where we have this intensive care and support up until the age of 18, when they're then living in a much more flexible arrangement into 18, 19. And I think that does mean that we have to think very carefully about it feeling homely and giving them an element of independence. I intend to have a continuous and robust conversation with Ofsted about their framework. I think some parts of the framework are absolutely spot on, and some parts, frankly, are not supporting us in being able to provide and deliver good care. I think they need to be more flexible around their registered manager requirements. It's making it very challenging for us to establish our residential units. So I think, Kate, which you were just saying, I think it'd be really helpful if at a future board we had a really straightforward conversation about how we're going to develop and deliver residential care here in the county, because it is challenging. I don't think I'd pass muster as a registered manager, would I, Paula? I think my experience would be too out of date.
I think it would, unfortunately.
Yeah. So I'm allowed to manage all of the services. I'm allowed to be a DCS, but I can't be a registered manager. That's bonkers. And that kind of conversation is what we need to be having with Ofsted, to be able to say to them, look, you need to support us in being able to have a bigger pond to fish in of really fantastic people who've got a range of expertise. I mean, it's great that lots of our registered managers and Paula and others have got really recent residential experience, but many people haven't. And it doesn't mean that they're not able to provide good care. So those are some of the small elements we are talking about with Ofsted. And absolutely things like CCTV would be other conversation points I'd be having with them about, for many children who may have been subject to abuse through multimedia purposes. It's absolutely inappropriate for them to have those sorts of things focused on them all the time. So we'll keep being robust, but only because we're going to be our absolutely best, good and outstanding selves. So massive ambition from the team, but also needing to have that complex conversation here would be really welcome, I think, as we go forward to doing further registrations.
I wonder, Teresa, whether I was talking with Louise and Sarah Jane about that maybe being a workshop conversation where we can throw out ideas and hopefully the best ones will come to the surface, and we can pull best practice from all sorts of areas, so moving forward, because we are stepping into a new arena in the providing residential care ourselves. Again, yes, we did it before, but we haven't done it for a little while. So having that that sort of informal conversation sooner rather than later might be a good idea, and it's something that I think we would be useful to explore. Sarah Jane, have I got you there wanting to speak?
Thank you, Councillor Weller. And just Councillor Biggs, thank you for just reminding us all of the importance of just reaching out to people who need to know where we are, because it's important that they know where we are. And Louise is absolutely on her agenda, I think possibly even started to make contacts with ward members where appropriate to do so, just to very warm invite to know that we're there, and how they can support us as well in being there. So really good point. And as our family of residential grows, it's going to be even more important. So it's a helpful reminder. But thank you. We'll do that.
Thank you. Have we got any other questions there? I can't see any. Did you want to come back, Teresa? I'm trying to read your face and see whether you wanted to come back. No.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Paula, are you happy with the comments made? Did you want to come back on anything at all?
No, thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you very much for that report in that case.
Thank you.
Right. Next meetings. So who's taking on Matthew's role here, Louise or Sarah Jane?
I'm trying very hard. So our next meeting is the 6th of September.
And that's an informal one, is that right?
Yes.
Right. Okay. So
and that will mean that papers will be ready for submission. 16th of September, and papers will be ready for submission by the 6th of September. Apologies, Councillor Weller.
Right, no, that's fine.
I shortened our time frames, you see. I'm hopeless without Matt.
We're all hopeless without Matt. My crib sheet isn't even up to date. Richard, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, it's just a point. I know we had a discussion in private. It's about we have informal yes. and informal meetings, and the danger is that sometimes we have formal reports coming to, as we discussed, that are sort of agreed and noted, and of course there won't be minutes for the informal meeting. So I don't know how we need to take that forward, just to be careful, because something could slip through the net and we'd say, well, we never discussed that. We think, well, yes, we did, but it was in an informal meeting and never got noted. And I think just need to be a bit careful how we manage that. I don't know what was agreed at the end of that.
I think what I suggested, but we didn't get agreement, and I wanted to get an opportunity to speak to Councillor Parry and to Teresa at some point. I think that moving forward, the suggestion was that we might need to sort of do an audit of what reports come to us and when, and make sure that we have meetings appropriately timed for those reports to be presented in a timely fashion at a formal meeting, so that it is recorded that the report has been presented and been noted, and any comments that we made are noted as well. And I think, and you will know better, and we'll have that conversation and decide upon it. But it may be that there are rather more formal meetings in order to do that. They would be rather more in number perhaps, but shorter in length, because they would be more manageable. We wouldn't be repeating that situation of, I mean, today has been very, very manageable, but we have had, 8 or 10 reports coming, and there's no way that we can give those reports justice in the time that we have allocated. So if we can just sort of look at that, and then those informal meetings become very much more the workshop type meetings, where we can get the conversations and the input with our young people that we had at our last meeting, for example, which was so helpful, I think, both for us and for our young people as well, because they were able to properly engage with us and tell us things that for many of us we don't know, and I think it helped them to feel that they were engaging with us and that we were listening and we were taking notes, and that they were informing us, because that's really what we want. So I think that's a conversation that offline, as it were, we need to have, so that we can schedule those in a much more timely and much more efficient way, I think. Simon, you wanted to come in?
Just very briefly, I've been trying to deal with the safeguarding thing, and the person's literally rung back as I put my hand up, so I'll have to deal with that in a second. So just to say that members will be aware that we've been in the process of recruiting staff around our Youth Voice team, and Kay starts in her role next week. So some of you will have met Kay in her role around the care leavers support group, etc. So Kay is going to be fantastic for doing that, and I think one of the things I really want Kay to focus in on is a conversation with members about what is the interaction that we want, and what is the best way for our children in care and our care leavers to inform the business of what goes on here. So how do they help us and shape both the agenda and the decisions that are taken in this group in the most productive way? And I want to try and move into a thing in which we're working together rather than into a space in which you know, young people are bringing a list of complaints and things that are wrong, and we're trying to fix those. I'd much rather move into the space where things that are presented here have been done with our children in care and with our care leavers, so that we've actually tried to produce a solution with young people's involvement before things get here. So that's the space we want to be in, and I'm going to be tasking Kay with doing that. But we've got a slight challenge at the moment, which is a lot of our members of children in care and care leavers that were involved previously have fallen away. So we need to do some work just to recruit and get ourselves back up to speed.
Thank you, that's very helpful. Sarah Jane.
Thank you, Councillor Weller. Just to say, after we had a meeting last week where we discussed it, I had a quick look at our agendas. I'm very confident that thinking about the way forward, we've done that catch up we needed to do to make sure our statutory annual reports have come through, and that we will be able to do a mix of the informal workshops, just as we're describing. Really heartened to hear that Simon's commitment to helping us think about that with young people, and then the more formal reports. So my suggestion is that Louise and I draft up agendas for yourself and Councillor Biggs to have a look at, and if agreed, and we'll share those also with Teresa and Councillor Parry, and hopefully we can have an agreed way forward.
Lovely, thank you. Thanks very much. Teresa.
Yeah, thank you. Chair, I will get a meeting in with myself and Councillor Parry before the end of August, so that we can have that conversation. I'm just also aware that on the 16th September, we're probably going to find Corporate Parenting Board right in the eye of the storm again, around in and out or take it all about, as we have been before. So I think we're probably at liberty, and Kate from Dem Services may tell me otherwise. Kate, are we at liberty to make a decision about whether we meet in person or not by the 16th? I think that we will be, won't we?
It's going to be reviewed on the 16th. Well, not on the 16th, but mid-September. I understand that there will be a review by Matt Prosser, Chief Executive, and the group leader to decide which way we go forward, whether we'll be then looking at the end of September to be having them face to face. So I would anticipate the 16th of September will be virtual.
I'll hold on a bit longer then.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, I think it's really useful that we know in advance, we don't fall into that trap again. So we're planning for another virtual meeting, and then hopefully at the end of September, early in October, we'll be moving to more normal ways of operating again. We'll keep our fingers crossed.
And I think we were thinking, Kate, that for the next time when we can meet, and it's an informal one, we'll use one of our lovely outdoor spaces so that our young people can be with us confidently, comfortably, and we can all be together and do something practical or fun or some such thing.
Yes.
So maybe West Moors or somewhere like that, if colleagues are okay to do that.
Okie doke. Well, we've got a little while to think about that, haven't we? I don't think I've got nothing else in the chat bar. Nobody wanting to speak. Is anybody desperately want to say anything? No, looks as though we're okay. Thank you all very much indeed. That was very useful, very useful. Thank you all very much indeed. Enjoy your evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.